Maria, the NEWTOWN documentary, how did you get involved in the film?
Kim contacted me when she was in the community exploring how she was going to tell this very sensitive story of the most tragic shooting of school children in America's history. And I was very interested in the opportunity to take a look back at a community so devastated by such a traumatic act of gun violence, to really examine the long-term effect on a community in aftermath. So after the cameras are gone, when a community is left to pick themselves up and move forth, what happens to the families who lost children, their relationships in the community, the experiences of the teachers, of law enforcement, of faith leadership. These were all subjects that were of great interest to me personally, and that both Kim and I felt were critical in telling the story of NEWTOWN.
For those who feel strongly about gun control, mental illness, a community dealing with grief, what would your message be to them about seeing NEWTOWN if they're afraid that it'll affect them too heavily, it'll be too emotional? Although you've done a beautiful job with the film, what would your message be because they haven't seen it? How would you let them know that
we
it's
were
okay?
very careful and sensitive about not telling a story recounting the tragedy of NEWTOWN. That's not the point of the film. The point of the film is really the experiences of the community in aftermath of the experience. So we encourage people to see it. You know, we don't have the luxury to forget what happened at the Sandy Hook School and to the community of NEWTOWN at large. It's part of our history. And we hope people experience a sense of uplift. We do think there's tremendous hope in the message of community resilience. And NEWTOWN is a tremendous example of that. They really came together on many levels as a community to move forth with their lives.
And you met the parents, you met a lot of the people that were featured in the film?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I have to ask this question, and that is, there is a community of people that feel that Sandy Hook may have been staged and a hoax, and as insulting as a question as this is, I just have to, for the record, have you tell me your opinion or thoughts on anyone watching that may feel they want to comment in a negative manner against the film and what you've done and the years that you've put into it.
Yes, I mean, the idea of, you know, the truther movement and denying the tragic shooting it's just nonsense. It's nonsense. It's, of course, insulting and tremendously hurtful to the families who lost loved ones, to the entire community of NEWTOWN, as it would be in any case where, you know, whether it's 9/11 or other shootings where there are, you know, conspiracy theories. I mean, it's nonsense. It's not worth certainly the community's time nor our time, but it is certainly unfortunate that they have reached out in such personal ways to families who lost loved ones.
Okay. This is not your first film about shootings. Can you tell me about your previous film?
Yes, I actually was in NEWTOWN with a film about Virginia Tech and the experiences through a student who was shot 5 times in the tragic episode. And Colin Goddard is the subject. He's a leading national advocate on gun reform, and we were in the NEWTOWN community working with advocates and with the victim community. And you know, this was months later when I had an opportunity to learn what Kim was interested in developing, and you know, we were very like-minded in the approach of telling the story of community.
Your exact role in the film, you were producer, executive?
Producer.
Okay, producer. How did you work with Kim? She was the director. What was your role? How was your communication? I believe you were in the editing room.
We were extremely collaborative. You know, it's the subject is so sensitive that it really, you know, every decision was very careful. And in every way, we sought together to honor the community and the families who had experienced so much. So a tremendous amount of patience was required, both in filming and in the editing process.
And so you had done a film about Virginia Tech?
Yes,
Is that right?
that's right.
And that was back in 2007?
It was completed in 2011. It was a short documentary, shortlisted that year in 2011, called Living for 32. And in that film, we were more political and more aggressive about the issue of gun reform, background checks, and exploring legal and illegal transactions of firearms to make a political point through the subject story of overcoming obstacles and recovering from such tremendous trauma. But NEWTOWN, we really felt was an opportunity to tell the story of a community months after and years after the incident, and be able to treat community as character in, really transcending failed political discourse and touching hearts across America about, this is what really happens to a community after such devastating acts of gun violence.
So you knew going in what you did not want the documentary NEWTOWN to be about. You knew that you wanted it to be more about the community, the families. Can you talk about that versus a hardcore sort of political agenda? Because the movie doesn't really go there. It's definitely more about the stories of the people affected.
Yes, absolutely. We wanted the film to be as simple and authentic as possible. That word is overused frequently, but it really best describes our strategy. And the honest stories of what families experienced and what community members experienced is what we wanted to share, without any over direction or leading or comment on part of the filmmakers. Really their story. And what we're finding with audiences is that it's really touching people in a very special way, because it's making people feel and think about the issue in a way that they wouldn't necessarily have the ability to do if it was a harder hitting political and advocacy presentation.
Right, it's definitely much softer, and I like how, I believe did you use drones in a lot of the filming?
Yes, the drone footage we felt was very effective in bringing the audience into the community and showing the beauty of an every town USA. So NEWTOWN is a very beautiful place.
Yeah, obviously from what you've shown, and it was definitely another character in
Yes.
the film. Do you remember being in the editing room and certain things that you decided to change, or certain ways that you wanted to make sure that it did not become that film that was too overly politicized?
Yeah, that was a very delicate, careful balance, and we struggled with presenting too little advocacy or too much advocacy, how much is too much to tell. The emotional mapping was something that was, in the edit room was a very careful process. Our editor, Gabriel Rhodes, was just, tremendously talented and was able to really help bring the thread of emotional mapping through the narrative in a way where audiences can experience and engage through an intimate relationship with the subject, but without it being too much and too difficult. That was a very careful balance. And an example would be the treatment of the shooter. How much information to provide about the shooter and how much not to disclose. That's a very sensitive issue for victim communities. Typically, they do not want to honor the shooter by using their name. And media also had cooperated in an effort called No Notoriety, and trying to really keep the identity and the story of the shooter at a minimum. So we tried to provide as much information as we could within that balance to satisfy the viewer as curiosity and not too much.
That seems to be a very new movement, I think, as an outcry to us sensationalizing these shooters and then hence having these copycat situations.
Yeah.
When did that take place?
The No Notoriety?
Yeah.
No Notoriety started after NEWTOWN.
Did it? Okay.
And it's, it's had slow momentum in building, but I do see that media is trying to honor that movement.
Yes, I do. I think we all feel responsible in some ways for the part that we play.
Which is a good thing.
Advice to other producers on working with a director, especially with something that you want to be very sensitive about how you are portraying the film. You don't want to make it to this or to that.
You know, it's these are all unique collaborations, and you know, Kim and I were fortunate. We really shared a vision. We never had a moment where there was disagreement really about the way in which we were working with the subjects, and I think that's the most important component in a successful collaboration, is that you really have to be on the same page with the story you want to tell and how you want to work with your subjects to really bring about that outcome.
Are you able to talk about how you receive funding for the film?
Sure.
Okay.
ITVS is our partner. They have been terrifically supportive. We would not have been able to make the film without them. And Transform Films is our initial production partner and has been very supportive and generous. And the balance of funding we raised through foundations and organizations and private funders.
And how long did that whole process take, or was it piecemeal?
It was piecemeal. We were filming all throughout the 3 years, and we were fortunate that we live in New York, and we were able to travel to NEWTOWN frequently and without the expense of being on the other side of the country, and that was a tremendous help.
Lastly, the most powerful thing someone said to you that's not within the community after screening. I know you've gone to Sundance and various other festivals.
You know, I think Kim and I are very encouraged by the response from more conservative audiences, and often gun owners in the audience will say afterward, I'm going to think more about how I'm storing my firearms. I'm going to think more about, owning assault weapons, having them in my home. And I think that's the kind of discussion that we're hoping will continue. And we're hoping that we can really empower communities to come together themselves, reflective of the constituencies represented in the film. Teachers, law enforcement, faith leadership, local community leaders coming together and having their own town halls and conversations on the issue of prevention of gun violence.